Thank you, Raul. As Raul said, I am Richard Peddie, and I believe I'm a city builder. I'm a city builder in my business life. I'm a city builder in my deployment of my personal resources, and I'm a city builder when it comes to my voice. When I was running Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment for 14 years, one of our core values was to be a leader in the community. And we did that in part by investing $1 billion in the community on things like Air Canada Centre, BMO Field, Maple Leaf Squares, facilities that not only bring visibility to the city and economic benefits, but facilities that all fans of whatever sport, win or lose, could enjoy. And importantly, in all of those, that $1 billion, 95% of it was our own money, which is not the rule in sports teams in North America. I'm a city builder, I'm a city builder in my personal life. I'm on the Toronto Foundation board. I'm very active in that. The Toronto Foundation does a wonderful job of identifying groups that we can invest in. And my wife Colleen and I have our own Toronto Foundation, and we give money to groups. I'm also a city builder when it comes to my voice. I've taken a very public stance for the LRT instead of the subway in Scarborough. I was against the jets at Billy Bishop Airport, and I constantly champion bike lanes. I've spoken about the need of all politicians to embrace a vision and values for the city. Vision and values that direct all of their investments and all of their policies. As in my introduction, I have read written two books that talked about city building and adding bricks to the civil foundation. I believe that cities and communities are like a house, and that as leaders, corporations, and individuals, we have three choices. We can do nothing to the foundation of the house. Think of it as you leave your house alone, the roof deteriorates, the front porch deteriorates. We can actually do things to the foundation that make it worse. We can take bricks away from the foundation. Or we can be that person who makes the house, the community, the city better by adding bricks to the civil foundation. I am definitely the latter. I take comfort that monocles, The Economist, Mercer constantly talk about Toronto as being one of the great, most livable cities in all of the world. But I sometimes wonder if we deserve it. It seems to me there is so much more that we can do, and I suspect, looking at this room and hearing what you do, you suspect that too. While I generally feel good about the future of Toronto, I do worry about it a bit. And I worry about almost all of the world's great cities. Now, there was a very sobering article in the Economic Forum just this last January, and the article was entitled, "The Future Depends on Our Cities." And it went on to say that the unprecedented growth in urbanization will play a role in the world's successes or failures. And we know that all of the cities are growing. And that's where all the growth is in the world now. And we're seeing the same thing in Canada. Now, Toronto doesn't have the same issues as the sprawling slums of Asia and China, and there are many of those. But our issues are still worrisome. The lack of really good transit, youth unemployment, income and social inequality, environment, affordable housing. Again, I suspect you know them better than me. And unfortunately, the solutions are often at the mercy of our elected officials, who I worry sometimes first priority is to get reelected in the next election, and also focus more on what's happening in their ward instead of doing the right strategic things for all of Toronto. They're often influenced by lobbyists, and they're fearful of NIMBYism. So we can't always count on politicians to do the right thing. A lot is resting on what we do here in Toronto for ourselves, but as Raul has often been quoted, there's a lot of the world that's looking for how we do in Toronto. I'm going to quote from him, and I think I've got the quote right. He says, "The world needs Toronto to succeed. We are a petri dish for globalization. Others look to us to see how our diverse communities can get along. We are a beacon of hope, and if we can't get along, I'm not sure who can. End of quote. So what does that mean to all of us? Well, I think we have two choices. We can manage what's given to us. We can simply manage. Or we can be a leader that steps into the void, takes charge, creates something new, creates something better. In all my years of business experience, I learned many business lessons. I learned them from my successes, candidly from my failures, and often I made a lot of discoveries as I went through my career. So briefly, this morning, I'm going to talk about the importance of leadership. Leadership, whether you have the power, or leadership where you have the chance to speak to power. Now, as was described, my most recent book is 21 Leadership Lessons, but if you ever pick up the book and read it, you'll realize there's more like 100. Now, I won't take you through all of them. This clock precludes me doing that, but I will quickly talk about 6 of them. And the first 2 are the very foundation of my leadership philosophy, and I practice those successfully at Pillsbury, Skydome, and Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment. And the first one, the chapter says, the critical importance of having a vision, or as I like to say, the what. It's a stretching, aspirational, reinforcing statement of intent. Even something seen in a dream. Now, I'm a big fan of Jennifer Keesmaat, the chief city planner. I think we're really fortunate to have her. Just last week, I follow her on Twitter, and she said this about vision and dream. So much about city building is imagination. It's about our aspirations. Jennifer gets it. Now, I believe that historically, if you look, the Toronto's leaders have been pretty weak on vision. And in fact, in the last municipal election of a little over a year ago, none of the 3 major candidates had a vision for Toronto. Yes, they had lots of programs, they had lots of tactics, but none of them laddered up to a vision. So they were very low on vision. And for us to be the most livable, best city to live in, as is already reported, we need a vision. So I believe that Toronto needs a vision. It's why it's the first chapter in my book. But I believe your organizations need that as well. So ask yourself, of all of your organizations, what is your vision? What is your what? My second lesson, as I said, I have 2 leadership philosophy cornerstones. My first one's vision. My second one is values. The vision is the what, and the values are the how. They make clear on how you're going to realize your dream. They are the critical principles of which to depend upon, and they always help you focus your resources and lead your behavior. Now, my first book, Dream Job, I took a shot in a chapter on what I thought the values of Toronto should be. However, you get a publisher, they want you to write so many thousands of words, and I found myself going over that amount, so I decided to drop that, and it was lost on the editing floor. But what I'd like to share with you very briefly today was what I think the 4 values of Toronto could be. Very top line. Healthy. Deployment of green technology, much better transit, great parks, making the city as walkable as possible, bike lanes everywhere. Healthy. Secondly, stimulating. Support the arts, the education, all the events that bring people out and getting them stimulated and talking to each other. Sustainability. Now, of course, we need healthy financials. We can't do it without that. But it's also, we need great infrastructure. We need to invest in our transit, in our bridges, in our roads, in our sewers, in our computer systems. Rahm Emanuel, who's the very embattled mayor of Chicago right now, once said this: you can't have a 21st century economy built on a 20th century foundation without holding yourself back. And my 4th value, I really think talks to our last speaker, diversity. A city that grows stronger by accepting equality, that accepts different cultures, languages, and religions. Now, as Toronto needs to decide on its values or principles, again, as organizations, you do. We decided in all those companies I mentioned, we decided on our vision, we decided on our values. We were always true to those values, and we used them to direct all of our strategies and investments. There's a Japanese proverb that I really like. I've seen it show up a couple of times now. I use it all the time. A vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare. Think about that. I go into companies, I see their vision statement on the wall, I see it in their annual report, but they're not doing anything about it. They're not really living it. Therefore, it's a daydream. Or you have the situation where there is no vision and there's all kinds of action, and that's when you get your nightmare. Lesson number 5, embrace contrary thinking. Great leaders encourage everyone to speak up and speak out. And I believe that all of us have to be open to contrary thinkers, from our boards, our bosses, and our employees. My philosophy on contrary thinking, well, I think contrary thinking is really a form of energy, and it just needs to be managed and, importantly, listened to. And if there isn't any contrary thinking, then it's quite possible that some of us are redundant. Now, not all decisions have to be unanimous. Sometimes the lone contrary thinker wins out. Now, as a leader, I always really tried to encourage contrary thinking at Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment. I had a wonderful executive vice president who always really spoke to our values, championed them. She challenged me, and we would get together many times and we'd hammer through. You know, she could change my mind sometimes, she could modify it, sometimes I'd say no. And I asked her once, I said, why do you have the courage to constantly challenge me? You know, I'm your boss. And she said her confidence came to speak up because I had a willingness to listen. And that was one of the greatest compliments I've ever received as a leader. Now, contrary thinking can be a classic case of truth speaking to power. It's difficult, it's scary, it can be dangerous to your career. There's a Ruth Simmons, who was the first African-American president of an Ivy League school, that said this about contrary thinking: one's voice grows stronger in encounters with opposing views. And then there's a Brazilian lyricist, an author who will have the last word on contrary thinking. Truth, whether it's good or bad, is liberating. So I'm a big fan of contrary thinking. Lesson number 7, best practices, legitimate plagiarism. Now, I first heard about best practices, my editor hated it too. I first heard about best practices in the mid-90s. And I hadn't heard the term, but then I realized I was using best practices when I was running Hostess, Pillsbury, TSN. I was constantly using great ideas I found from those countries in other countries. But it wasn't until I read Robert Stanley's book, Jack Welch, The GE Way, that I was introduced to the concept of legitimate plagiarism. Now, I fully agree that one can't steal a scientific formula, plagiarize a book or a song, and ignore patents. But one can definitely take ideas from the public domain. They can take, adapt, build upon, make better. You know, when I was back about 7, 8 years ago, I was really a big fan of the ESPN sports bars. And I looked at it, I thought it was a best practice, but I really thought it could be improved upon. And sure enough, we opened Real Sports Bar and Grill with much improved audiovisual, you know, that huge screen, with fresh food, a wonderful kind of arena design. And we took what was a best practice and made it even better. And within a half a year, it was chosen as the best sports bar in North America by ESPN. They started out as an American contest, but we won it. They had to call it a North American winner. And we became the #1 revenue restaurant in all of Canada, and that was from a best practices. So how do you find best practices? Well, you find them everywhere in any way. Keep your eyes open, your antenna up, ideas from art, music, books, museums, television. And of course, from other organizations and even other industries. As president, I expected my organization, my staff, to always be aware of best practices and constantly bring them up when they're making recommendations. If I was mayor of Toronto, and I don't wish to be, but if I was mayor of Toronto, I would have a best practices department that made sure that all the departments, when they were bringing something forward to council, were always mindful of what's happening in Amsterdam and Rome and all the great cities across the world. Lesson 14. Have you ever seen a statue erected to recognize a pessimist? Pessimist, not me. I'm a real optimist. I'm not a head in the sand, rose-colored glasses, don't worry, be happy optimist. But I believe that optimism has really contributed much to my career success. There's a Martin Seligman who's the founder of positive psychology movement. I didn't realize there was such a movement until I did my research. But he said this, he says, one is often optimistic about their beliefs or their expectations of the future because of their past experiences with success. I had success at Skydome because of a lot of things I did in consumer products. I used the Skydome experience at Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment. I used the TSN experience at Maple Leaf Entertainment. So I'm a successful optimist when I think strategically, I do my research, best practices, a solid financial analysis, and execute superbly. Let's take football, or as they call it in this country, soccer. When we launched Toronto FC, the history of football in this city, many failed teams, failed leagues. But I looked at it, I studied the demographics of this city, all the new Canadians, where are they coming from? They're coming from football-playing countries, far more, incredibly far more than hockey. I looked at the league, Major League Soccer. I looked at its owners. I looked at its commissioner. I looked at its collective bargaining agreement, which is important in sports. We did research that proved that it would be more successful if it was down at Exhibition Place. And then I also knew that we had the clout and sophistication of Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment to make it a go. So I was optimistic about its success. A lot of people came out immediately and said it would fail. What happened? We haven't had much success on the pitch, but it's definitely created another major sports franchise in the city, and an investment that I spent $20 million on is now worth $200 million. So I'm an optimist, but it's not difficult at all to find people that don't believe that optimism is a big thing or really play it down. Google Gabrielle Ostinger, for instance. You will find her in New York Times and the Harvard Business Review, and she has no time for optimism at all, but I do. And so does retired General Colin Powell. Now, he's written a couple of books. One of them I liked, and I got a partial quote out of this book. Perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. The ripple effect of a leader's enthusiasm is awesome. Spare me the grim litany of the realist. Give me the unrealistic aspirations of the optimist any day. So I encourage you all to be an optimist that helps your organization and helps the whole GTA area be great. Now, given time, I could discuss many other leadership beliefs. 20 minutes goes by very quickly. And so, in conclusion, my final lesson, number 21 in my book, is get back to the gym. Get back to the gym. Let's think about it. You've got a vision for your organization, check. You've got solid core values and use them to religiously direct everything you do, check. You know best practices and you use them. You speak truth to power wherever you can. You're optimistic about being successful. You work your butt off and shit happens. Your project that you've been working on, you've given your heart and soul to fails, your organization is faltering, your career stalls. So what do? You get back into the gym. My dream, I wrote down when I was 20 years old, so naive, there was only 12 of these jobs in the world. I decided I wanted to run an NBA team. 20 years old. 26 years later, Larry Tannenbaum and I team up to apply for an NBA team for Toronto. We don't get the team. I'm this close to being president of a team after 26 years. The next morning, I'm not feeling really good about this. I've missed out on my dream after 26 years. And I pick up a paper, and there's an individual who had just lost out on buying a company. And they asked him what about it? And he says, they won, I lost, next. What was my next? I moved on to run TSN, learned all about sports programming, doing production rights, launched the first sports website in Canada, tsn.ca. And 2 years later, after getting back into the gym, I was president of the Toronto Raptors. Thank you. So when you lose, when you have that setback, and you probably will, think next. Pivot, go on to your next project, figure out your lessons learned, redouble your efforts, continue to be optimistic and be a contrary thinker, and don't ever abandon your values, ever, ever. Now, helping to create a great city, a great community is really tough. Just like being a great leader is not easy, and it does not come to the individuals who are not prepared to work really hard for it. Great cities are not developed in a day. Great organizations are not developed in a day. And great leaders are not developed in a day. They all take a lifetime. So keep your leadership lessons handy and be sure to add bricks to the Civil Foundation. Thank you very much, and thank you for all that you do. Thanks.